Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about managing operations now, chapter 21. So let's get into that. There's quite a lengthy discussion. The interesting thing about operations are that it's much more complicated than what most people realize. It can be really kind of the crux of your business, your ability to manage operations, whether it be a small retail operation or a large manufacturing operation. The understanding the details of your operation and how you can manage those operations is really a challenge for every company. So what are operations? That's the processes used to create and deliver a good or service to customers, a value to your customers. Operations management then is the planning and control of a conversion process that includes turning inputs into outputs, the outputs being products and or services that customers desire. So operations management is the planning and control basically of the process of converting inputs into outputs, those outputs being the products and or services that your customers want. So remember these definitions. So if I'm trying to understand the operations of my company, then I need to ask myself some questions. And here's kind of some samples, questions that you can ask yourself. How much flexibility is required to satisfy customers over time? What is my customer demand today, and what will it be tomorrow and for the future? And can my facilities and equipment keep up with my demand? What options are available for satisfying my customers? And the kind of the derivative of this question would be, am I employing the best options, the most efficient options I can to satisfy my customers? What skills or capabilities set the firm apart from its competitors, such that the firm can best take advantage of these distinctive features in the market? Does the competitive environment require certain capabilities that the enterprise lacks? Am I missing something in order to compete better in the market in which I'm playing? All of these questions are good questions to ask yourself, even though your company may be operating well for the moment, even though you may be making a profit for the moment. There's always room for improvement and to become more efficient in your operation. So the process is important, whether you're managing products or whether you're managing services. Now, in this case, products are tangible, services are intangible. We'll talk about this some more as we move through this lecture today, too. Manufacturing can produce goods for inventory. Service operations cannot store or bank services. So basically, in manufacturing, my product I can save, I can store. In service industry, the intangible industry, I can't store services. I have to be able to deliver them when I have them ready to go. Productivity and quality is more easily measured in manufacturing, no question about it. Whenever I'm trying to measure my productivity in a manufacturing operation, it's much easier to measure than in a service operation. Quality is more difficult to control and establish in service than in manufacturing operations. Very, very true, because where I have a product, in this case a service, that sometimes is difficult to define in the first place, how can I possibly define how I'm going to manage quality in that service? What is quality in a service? You have to first define that. Customers are more involved in service than manufacturing operations. That's exactly true. In a manufacturing operation, my customer is involved at the product side. In a service operation, sometimes my customer is involved in defining the service. And so the customer has a tendency to be involved throughout the entire process. And technology can enable customers to provide more of their own services. If you don't believe this, then talk to some of the traditional phone companies nowadays, and some of the folks who traditionally have operated with walk-up type services. It's changing across the board. In fact, sometimes it's hard for you and I to keep up with it. So let's look at operations processes. And remember, we said that the operations is the process of converting inputs into outputs. So operations are defined by the process. So let's look here at a couple examples. On the left-hand side is a bakery. And interestingly enough, I have in one of my Management 308 sections, I have a team that's writing a business plan on a bakery this semester. So this pertains to them. The inputs to the bakery are the flour and the ingredients, and then the labor and the ovens and the energy that goes into that, any other equipment I use, all of my facilities, any workers and any skills that they use. Those are all inputs. The processes then involve the handling and mixing of the ingredients in the baking products, storing the finished products, baking the products, shipping the products to distributors. All of those are part of my processes. That last one, by the way, is really important, the shipping of products. And so what are the outputs? Well, in the case of a bakery, it's just baked products that satisfy my customers. And typically they have, not always true, but they have fairly short shelf lives. On the services side, and here the example is a dry cleaner. It's probably not the best service example I can think of, but the text uses this as an example. A dry cleaner, the inputs are your or my dirty clothing, any chemicals and cleaners that I have to clean those clothes, any hangers to hang them up on, plastic bags, the equipment that allows me to hang clothes on hangers and put bags on them, any storefront operations I need, the equipment that I need in the back room, any workers and skills that they need. Those are all part of the inputs in a dry cleaning business. The process is I have a basically retail transaction. A customer walks up, leaves dirty clothes, I write it down, I do what they ask me to do, spot cleaning, spot treating, or dry cleaning, or washing, whatever, and then pressing and ironing and packaging and getting it ready to deliver to the customer. Those are all part of the processes. And the outputs then are clean and pressed clothing and satisfied customers. So you can see here that in the service example, it's just a little bit different than in this specific example than the bakery. I would tell you that a better example here for services would be a professional company. For let's say an accounting company, or a law firm, or some other consulting company. Then you would have a different set of inputs, and then you would have a different set of processes that go on within that service, and customers all involved in here, and then the output would be a customer acceptable report, or a set of specifications, or whatever the particular output might be, a software program, whatever that output might be. And so we could use a little bit better example on the service side, but you get the gist here. It's inputs being converted into outputs. That's the operation. I'm converting inputs into outputs. It could be the product or service. So always there are capacity considerations, whether I have a service company or a manufacturing company. My capacity limits what I can turn out, how much I can produce, how much services I can offer. It just limits. I have planning and scheduling considerations I have to think about on the operations process. How do I achieve an orderly and sequential flow of products through my or services through my operations? The planning and scheduling is critical for service operations. Let me just give you an example. I have a consulting company. I have a client who's awarded me a large contract to do a study for him, and or to generate a master plan, or to do whatever. And then I have another client that comes in that needs another equivalent type job done, but I'm already stretched with the number of employees that I have to do this first job, and so immediately I've got a planning and scheduling problem. And so in order to do the second job, I'm going to have to put that second customer off a little bit further down the schedule, calendar-wise. And so then I need to look at various strategies to accomplish demand. How do I manage demand? And how do I stimulate customer demand when it's low? In other words, how do I get customers to walk in my front door or to contact me and get me to do a job for them? So demand is an issue always on an operation, whether it be manufacturing or service. Now, inventory and the manufacturing operation is critical, and we have all kinds of things to think about in inventory management. We have to think about how do we keep a continuous operation going on. One way you keep a continuous operation going on is you have the inventory there to support that operation. Well, how do you maximize sales? Well, again, inventory management is critical for that as well. And how do you protect that inventory? Because inventory now becomes an asset. Once I buy an inventory, I've got to store that inventory, I've got to put it somewhere, I've got to protect it. And then, of course, I've got to optimize my investment in inventory. I do not want inventory sitting around for a long time not being used, because that's dollars sitting around not being used. So inventory management always becomes an issue for smaller companies, whether it be a service company or a manufacturing company. This diagram is pretty simple diagram to see. If I've got my seesaw here in the situation that you see where service level is very low, then I'd like to satisfy more customers, and so I'm going to kind of lower that balance sheet down a little bit where I can get my service level up. Or another way to look at it is if my service level is in good shape where I can satisfy more customers, then my balance sheet is going to be a little bit different than what I want it to be, because when I buy inventory, that inventory goes onto the asset side of my balance sheet, and it tends to impact other areas of the balance sheet when I do that. So there's kind of a balancing act, no pun intended here, where I've got to be able to provide service, but I've got to try to minimize the investment in inventory that's not being used. And you can see here from this diagram alone what the advantage of just-in-time inventory control is, or just-in-time manufacturing. Just-in-time manufacturing says, I really don't have any inventory because all of my parts, all of my supplies that go into the manufacturing process show up at exactly the right moment, and they're not stored. So they never become an asset that's sitting in a warehouse somewhere. They go straight into the production line, straight into a product. That's the whole concept. That's to optimize this issue of inventory management. So what are the cost components of inventory management? Well, storage and space in warehouses is, and theft and loss is, and just the cost of inventory that's just sitting around not being used, or inventory that's become outdated and can't be used. So those are all costs. The cost that's incurred just for managing inventory, I have to be able to move it around a warehouse. I've got to be able to go get it and get it ready to go. I've got to be able to cycle through it and get rid of the inventory that's not damaged or not good anymore. I have to have insurance and security to manage and protect it. And then I have to get rid of inventory that's gotten old and can't be used anymore. So there's a lot of cost. That's kind of the story of this chart. There's a lot of cost that go into managing inventory that we don't think about sometimes. So let's look at one way to kind of look at cost, and this is called the economic order quantity. It's kind of a principle that most of you have seen before. So what this principle says, that the total inventory cost is equal to the total carrying cost plus the total ordering cost. And that truly is the total inventory cost. How much does it cost to buy it plus how much does it cost to keep it before we ship it? And so once I look at that, then I'm going to say, well, I want to keep my total inventory cost as low as I possibly can. So I want to optimize that equation. So to do that, then I look at the EOQ curve, the economic order quantity curve. Well, remember, it consists of two elements, the ordering cost and the carrying cost. And carrying costs go up linearly as I increase the amount of inventory that I have. And then, of course, ordering costs go down as I increase my order quantity. And so I've kind of got these two factors playing against each other. And if I plot out the sum of those, I get this red line right here. And so what I'm going to do to minimize my costs, I'm going to try to hit the bottom or the minimum point on this curve right here. And that's going to be my economic order cost. And that's where these two lines cross each other right there at the intersection point. That's my economic ordering cost. That's my lowest cost for buying inventory. Now, every company that buys inventory, as a manufacturing type company, has an inventory classification system. This is what the authors call the ABC system. Not every company uses this, but every company that uses a lot of inventory has some way of classifying their inventory. And so in this case here, Category A is the inventory that requires real close control. It's high dollar item inventory, or it's inventory that has to be especially cared for, or has some other thing affiliated with it that drives it. Typically, it'll be a high value item. Category B are those lesser value items that are kind of secondary importance, doesn't require a lot of cost to keep control of those. And in Category C are those items that you just use all the time. And every company has those items, nuts, bolts, screws, you name them, all those little things that you use in a manufacturing operation that you use all the time, lots of them, they don't cost very much. So I keep those in a kind of a warehouse situation, or a warehouse dispensing situation, where the production line can just get them as they need them, and I'm not going to worry about counting them out and keeping track of them. I just buy some when I need them, and when they're gone, then I'll make sure that I know that they're gone, and I buy some more. Now, in a practical situation, depending upon the manufacturer, I may have just a couple of categories here, inventory classifications. Those items that are higher dollar items and those items that are lower dollar common items or common parts and supply items. So it varies on the company, but just about every company will have some inventory classification system that they use. We've already mentioned just in time. Here's the definition on it. It's a demand method of reducing inventory level to an absolute minimum. And basically what that concept is that new inventory items arrive at the same time that the last inventory item is placed in service. Let's say it another way. New inventory items arrive just at the time that they are needed. So what does that do? That promotes closer coordination with our suppliers. I mentioned in the earlier lecture in Chapter 9 that the Jaguar automobile manufacturing plant in Coventry, England, that was what they operated on, that premise. They wanted very close coordination with suppliers. They wanted no time lost, did not want to store inventory, and so consequently, they worked out a deal where one of their major suppliers could be co-located with them. And so the supplier was providing product on the day, the moment that it was needed to go into an assembly. It provides you a consistent quality production. Quality control is a lot easier with just in time. And then you can lower your stock levels, your inventory levels. In fact, optimally what you'd like to do is take them to zero. Always in an operation, inventory record keeping is an issue. And for manufacturing, it's more so than it is in a service industry. In the service industry, sometimes there's not much inventory, but there's a little bit of inventory you have to keep track of. But in a manufacturing business, you have to really keep track of your inventory, and both from a physical standpoint. In other words, the physical inventory. So there's a lot of ways to do that. I can do cycle counting, where I just count different segments of inventory at different times of the year. Or I can do a perpetual inventory, where I keep a running record of inventory that does not require a physical count. This system right here, perpetual, is the best system. It's the most efficient system. And what that says is that every time I use something, I clock it out and I make a record of it. Every time I buy something, I clock it in, make a record of it. And I can do that using standard barcodes or QRC codes to do that. And I can do it electronically. So a lot of companies that are really good at what they do are using perpetual inventories nowadays. An example that you see every day is the supermarket. I go to the supermarket. That supermarket operator knows when I buy something and what it is that I buy, and knows how many they have in inventory at all times. That's what enables the Walmart example I gave in the Chapter 9 lecture, where if I want to buy an item that I know Walmart carries, I go to the internet, I check to see if Walmart carries that item. If they carry it, do they have it in stock? Which store do they have it in stock in? Well, these inventory keeping systems, record keeping systems, is what allows them to be able to keep track of what they have in stock, what's available for their customers to get. Now, a two-bin inventory system is a method of inventory control based on use of two containers for each item in inventory. One to meet the current demand and the other to meet future demands. And so what that means is that I have a bin where I keep parts in, say, and I work out of that bin until all the parts are gone, and then in the meantime I've purchased another bin full of those same parts, and it's sitting there not being used. So as the first bin empties, then I slide the second bin in and begin using it. I keep that then becomes my transaction record. I've used up one bin, I'm starting another bin, and I go order a replacement bin to be able to start that cycle over again. Let's talk about quality just for a little bit. Quality is a very important principle to incorporate in your business, whether it be a production business or a service business. Here's the definition of it. It's the features of a product or service that enable it to satisfy customers' needs. It's the perception of the customer as to the suitability of the product or service of a firm. Oftentimes, so often, quality is in the mind of the customer. And so then, as the service provider or product provider, then that immediately gives me some ideas about how I can improve my quality. I want my quality to be something that's recognized by my customer. And so as the manufacturer or provider of a service or product, I want to know what are the quality factors that are important to my customers. And so that becomes kind of the one component of what we call TQM, Total Quality Management. Total quality management is an aggressive, all-encompassing management approach to providing superior, high-quality products and services. And one of the really embedded features of TQM is that everybody involved in the process is involved in defining and managing quality that goes into its process or into its operations. So let's look at kind of the essential features of really a successful quality management program. Well, first of all, it's customer driven. I'm looking at my customer to find out what's important in my customer's eyes from a standpoint of quality. What is quality in my customer's eyes, and how do I define that? Is my organization committed to quality? And so many times I've seen companies that will say, yeah, we're really focused on quality, we like quality, and they just give you the old spiel, so to speak, on quality. But then when I look inside and see what's going on, I see, well, it's mostly lip service, it's not a real commitment. And so there's a big difference between lip service to quality and commitment to quality. And then if I'm committed to quality, I'm going to be watching and talking to my customer and figuring out what is quality in my customer's eyes. And I'm going to develop a culture that stays focused on that all the time. And that is going to be a top-down, top-driven culture in my company. And so that's the difference. Some companies give it lip service. Some companies integrate it into their culture, and consequently they end up with a better product. And you can probably cite several examples that fall right into this category. As I said before, we said that we've based this whole premise of quality discussion on the customer. My customer expectations is what's going to drive my definition of quality. So quality is the extent to which a product or service satisfies my customer's needs and expectations. I can sell an imperfect product that in my mind is imperfect, but my customer believes that it's perfect. And so then I have to ask myself the question, is that sufficient? Is that the quality that I need to incorporate, that I need to accomplish all the time? And so I need to be constantly looking at customer feedback. In my customers' minds, what is quality? What do they expect from me and from my company in terms of quality products or quality services? Talk a little bit about the International Standards Organization, ISO 9000, a very, very common certification requirement. Many large government projects require ISO 9000 certification. A lot of large suppliers, both in the U.S. and overseas, require ISO 9000 certification. When I say suppliers, I mean manufacturing companies. And so it behooves me then, if I'm operating a company that's building parts that I'm supplying or I'm supplying some kind of service, to at least look into being ISO 9000 certified. I've gone through this process before. I got into a situation one time where I was competing for a big contract and woke up one day to discover that the company that we had kind of merged with and absorbed part of their operation was not ISO 9000 certified, and so we were in a bind because the customer was demanding that, and so we had to do some scrambling. Most large government customers nowadays require ISO 9000 certification. This is the standards governing international certification of a firm's quality management procedures. There's a whole set of procedures that a company has to put into place and manage with data indicating that management in order to be ISO 9000 certified. Well, there's one thing that you need to be aware of, and I've always believed this and still believe it, that small companies can really outmaneuver larger companies in a number of areas, and this is one of the areas where they can do it, because small companies tend to have smaller organizations, smaller number of levels of organization, and smaller number of people you've got to communicate with, and so they tend to be very agile and can maneuver in the marketplace much better than, or much more efficient than larger companies. So a small company has some opportunities here that other larger companies may not have to provide a really good combination of tangible products and intangible services. You know, that's really a double statement when I say that. Products are tangible by definition, services are intangible by definition. We can, as a small company, I can provide very personalized services, a lot of contact, personal contact. I can provide service quality without regard to the profitability of the customer. And I can really develop good measures to control service quality because I have a much smaller organizational structure to deal with, and so consequently communications are faster, training is faster, response times are faster. All of those things serve to favor small companies. Talk a little bit about purchasing. That's a really important part of operations. whether you be a service company or a manufacturing company. But purchasing is the process of obtaining materials, equipment, and services from outside. And purchasing is the one area of operations that can easily sometimes fall into corruption, where you've got a weak purchasing organization, or you got a purchasing manager that's trying to sell favors, and it's just an area that lends itself to corruption. And so you have to constantly manage purchasing. You got to really stay on top of your purchasing function, whether you be a large company or a small company or even a government organization. I know in some of my involvement over the years in government organizations, I know that the purchasing part of that, particularly in large education institutions, is a very important function, and it's one that just provides all kinds of opportunities for corruption. And so you've got to set it up to stay on top of that. Now, what's the importance of purchasing? Well, it allows you to provide timely and consistent production of quality products. It allows you to get your finished products to your customers faster, and it allows you to control the cost of your products and therefore make your profitability better. Okay? So purchasing is really important to the operation of either manufacturing or service type operations, companies. What's the make or buy decision? That's always a purchasing issue. I have a manufacturing company. I have to decide whether I want to make a part or buy a part. And there's all kinds of reasons for doing that. I can free up some plant capacity. I can get a product out of my production line that I don't really need to be dealing with. And so obviously one of the things that I want to do if I'm looking at a make or buy is, if I do a buy here, am I removing from my capability an essential function that's critical to the market that I'm in right now? So you want to be careful about purchasing parts that really aren't directly involved in what you're trying to build. But if it's a key component, if it's a part that's really a proprietary type part, then it's highly unlikely I will not buy it. But if it's a part where I can buy cheaper than I can make it, and by the way, that's the ultimate decision-making point. Can I buy the part or buy the item cheaper than I can make it? If the answer is yes, then you need to look at really buying the part, as long as it's not going to be revealing your critical trade or manufacturing secrets. So what are the reasons for buying? Cheaper. Most of the time that's the driver right there. It saves me having to invest in personnel, space, and equipment. I don't have to manage that process anymore. I don't have to hire people to build those kind of things anymore. I have a little more flexibility in matching my supply and demand. There's just a whole list of reasons to buy. And probably, I'll say one more time, the driver here is going to be cost, given the fact that this is not a critical item from a technology manufacturing standpoint for my company. In other words, I'm not going to give away the crown jewels of my company, the core essential functions of my company. I'm not going to outsource those, or I'm not going to buy those. Outsourcing is where I purchase products or services that are outside the firm's area of competitive advantage. So typically outsourcing is what I'm going to do when I don't have a skill level or a competitive advantage in that area. Cooperative purchasing organization, a co-op, COO, sometimes you see a hyphen between those O's. That's where a group of small businesses get together to provide a buying function, purchasing function for that group of small businesses in order to get volume up and to be able to compete for lower prices. You see this a lot, particularly in the agricultural business community, lots of co-ops, both buying co-ops and selling co-ops as well. There's a lot of talk about sole source suppliers and multiple suppliers and things like that, but let's just talk about a couple of things here. If I have a critical product and I've got a supplier who's been a dedicated supplier and supplies that product efficiently and cost effectively and timely and really performs, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to a sole source acquisition or sole source purchasing. A lot of people, particularly people who are trying to criticize government purchasing policies or trying to apply government purchasing policies to industry, don't realize that sometimes sole source providers are better than multiple source providers. There's kind of a false concept in the political world that says, well, if I've got a lot of people bidding on a job, then I'm going to get the best price for that job. That's not always true. And price is not always what you want. What you really want in trying to get a service or a product is I want best value. And value is not just cost sometimes. And so this is sometimes why those who are trying to make purchasing decisions, particularly in government, get led astray and say, well, this is the cheapest price, we're just going to buy it. Law doesn't require cheapest price. Law requires best value, and sometimes we lose sight of that. Value is what's really important. Now, so if I've got a qualified, loyal, very good sole source supplier, I'm going to stay with him. I may not even compete. Now, if prices go up and I can figure out that he's gouging me a little bit, then next time around, I'll be competing. There's good reasons to have multiple suppliers as well, particularly on common products that are kind of common products in the marketplace. Then it's good to have multiple suppliers there for a lot of reasons. First of all, I get the best quality and price, and secondly, I've got a supplier assurance. I'm assured that I'll have a supplier for those products. I guess the bottom line here is that sole source is not bad. Competition is not bad either. It's good. So you have to kind of decide for yourself what's best for your company. One thing you do want to think about, though, is as a purchasing organization, you want to keep good relationships with your suppliers. So what that means is you're going to pay them promptly, on time. You're going to treat them with respect and courteousness. You're going to allow them to come in and talk to you and not look down your nose at them, not be condescending or or ugly in that sense. You want to build good relationships. That's really what we're talking about. You want to try to minimize any order cancellations or order changes, and keep those to a minimum if you can. You don't want to browbeat your suppliers, and you want to make suggestions, feedback to your suppliers that allows them to do a better job at supplying you, even to improve their product. There's nothing wrong with that as well. Now, strategic alliances are important sometimes as well, and require a lot of coordination. I'm both a proponent and an opponent of strategic alliances. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but from a supplier standpoint, they can be very nice. And so what that means is that I form a strategic alliance. I form a sole source strategic alliance. I bring a supplier in or a subcontractor in as a partner on a large job or a large prime contract that I'm bidding on, and I create a strategic alliance with that customer. I still have a subcontract relationship, but I have a relationship that's formalized, is documented, that is broader than just a buyer-seller type relationship. For instance, I bring a subcontractor in as a strategic partner on a particular type of product that I'm trying to sell somewhere. One of the deals that subcontractor is going to ask for, and I'm going to negotiate an agreement with him on, is the agreement that says that if we win this contract or we win this job and we sell this item, then on the next job I get first dibs. I get a first right of refusal, or I will be the sole source supplier of that product forever as long as this customer is trying to build this product that he's going into the market with. So strategic alliances can be good. They can not be good depending upon your relationship. Relationships, everything is strategic alliance. If you can't manage the relationship, if you can't cultivate the relationship, then don't do it. Stay away from the strategic alliance. But it allows you to get a good product quality. It allows you get the joint problem-solving capability of your partner. You can together make adjustments to market conditions. So there's a lot of pluses about supplier strategic alliances. It's something you really ought to be looking at. Now, this concludes our discussion in Chapter 21. And so what we'll do now is move, after Chapter 21, we'll move to, this is Unit 7, obviously, so we'll move to Unit 8 in our midterm exam. So this is going to basically get us through the first half of the semester, and we'll move on into Unit 9, Chapters 22 and 23 next.